Hi, and welcome to the Urban Tech VC, a podcast for urban leaders shaping the cities of tomorrow. If you love our show, do drop us a review, share it with your friends, and follow 2BX on LinkedIn or Instagram. Today, we're happy to welcome Bernd, co-founder of Gropius. Gropius is a tech company with a building operating system that is the central hub for a fully connected smart home system for both residents and asset holders. Bernd is responsible for business development and M&A, and he is shaking up the construction industry. If you're an urban tech founder about to raise a round, do reach out to us. We'd love to connect and see if we should play together. Are you tired of always hearing about Silicon Valley VCs and not knowing what the greats of European VC are thinking? Well, no more. Head on over to EU.vc, the go-to place for everything European VC. You'll find podcasts, events, and expert-curated content from all over the EU VC scene. Well, what are you waiting for? Go to EU.vc.
Hi, Bernd. Welcome to our podcast. A pleasure to have you here.
Hey, Katharina Hammer. Good to see you too.
We always kick off the podcast with our guests introducing themselves. So you have quite an interesting story behind you and seen a lot in the past years and working on a very interesting project now. So could you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit more about who you are and what brought you to the point where you are right now.
Yeah, happy to do so. Education, I'm a mechanical engineer, lawyer, and I did a finance MBA later on. So I'm kind of joking that I can talk about every topic, but I'm not good in any one of them. So it's a very generalist background. So spent some time in consulting, spent some time in paper industry, and then very quickly moved into timber, especially timber construction. So I ran a few companies that basically produced engineered timber components that then went into buildings. And the older I got, the closer I actually got to building buildings. And that is really the story also behind how I got involved in Gropius, which is still, great adventure, great project that we started 3.5 years ago, where I can bring in some of my background, but I still learn a lot. Yeah. Worked most of my life in corporate settings, which got boring after a while. It's kind of repetitive. There is hierarchies, there is politics, and you kind of need to adjust yourself to whatever corporate environment you're in. And the fun part about building Gropius is that we can build an organization based on what we believe is right. Yeah, things that actually are on top of people's minds when it comes to building a modern organization. Very much oriented along values, which is our own values, obviously, right? So we were asking ourselves the question, so what sort of organization do we want to build? Yeah? What does it need to represent? What topics do we want to work on? It was pretty obvious that the construction industry as such is broken. Yeah, it was also relatively easy to define what needs to be done differently. I think the interesting part here is getting a founders team together. And, I'm very happy and very lucky to be part of a founders team that really covers the whole range around real estate, construction, but specifically also tech, because that is really a main enabler and the main driver. When we first got together, I was asking myself the question, how confident am I that, tackling a whole industry would be something that this team could successfully deliver against? I said, look, it's not a guarantee, as nothing in life is. I, at that time, said it's 80%, and I'm still at 80% now, 3 years into it. Yeah. So, you need the right people with the right mindset, with the right targets, with the right backgrounds to actually confidently start something like that.
Instantly, I have two questions. So I think one that's particularly of interest is why move into timber or timber construction? And you've been doing this for quite a while now, right? So it was not common and not a main driver in the whole building or construction industry to work with timber, right? Too expensive and other constraints. So what shaped the decision, or what was the basis for the decision to focus on timber particularly?
There is areas in this world that are more experienced in timber construction. Like me being Austrian, being from Vienna, I would say the Austrian timber construction has been around for a while, so there is some experience. There is some cost differences to, let's say, the simple non-sustainable concrete solutions. But this you can address and solve when you take a more product-based approach as we do. Sustainability was one of the key drivers, and some of my co-founders come from industries that are less sustainable, I would say. They have kids, and they were asking themselves the question, so what sort of planet do I want to give to my kids when I'm getting out of here? So there was a very strong motivation to actually do something good for people and planet, and using timber as one of the construction materials is clearly key for that. On the other hand, it's not about using as much timber as you can. It's about using as little of every one of the materials. So it's around efficiency, it's around simplicity, it's around understanding the key properties of all materials and then using them wherever they fit best. So sometimes you use a piece of steel just simply because it's much better for a specific application than the same component or the same solution out of timber would be. And that's absolutely fine. So we don't believe in this, it can just be timber in a building and nothing else approach, right? So it's around matching materials with the best properties for the best possible purpose.
Mm-hmm. That is very plausible and interesting. But what you described, actually, you're trying something that sounds really complicated to me, right? You're not only trying to somewhat modernize or digitize part of the construction industry, at the same time, you're trying to make it more sustainable, which are, I think, the two main issues in the construction industry. There has been, and you quite sure know about that, there has been a very famous company that tried to solve the digitization and modularization aspect of the construction industry who failed last year, burning in total over $1.5 billion, right? So, poof, gone. Obviously talking about Katerra. So when you look at this case, what makes you confident that in comparison to Katerra, Gropius or you as a team have an advantage or can learn from the mistakes that have been done in that particular case?
It's a very good question. And we obviously looked at Katerra and we are also looking at some of the other players around. We are not the only one, which is good because no one alone can ever, have the full impact and the impact on the industry as it should be. Now, we focus on creating sustainable living for everyone. And I think it's important to talk a little bit about what those components mean. Sustainability is probably the easiest ones, right? It's around using materials that are sustainable, but it's also including having emission-free, healthy products. It's also around having, this aspect of social sustainability, microclimates, or whatever the building's effect is on the surrounding neighborhood. And that is one of the things that also distinguishes us from Katerra, because we focus on multifamily, multi-story buildings only, right? So we are very, very narrow in our initial product focus. And this is for a purpose, because we are saying, you can be average on a whole lot of things, or you can really focus on one thing and become excellent in that. There is always room to introduce other products afterwards, but don't do it too early, don't do it too soon. And the other one is this inclusive notion of everyone, which is affordability, but also universal design principles and making sure that also people with special needs can actually make use of the product. We own, and that's the end-to-end tech-enabled process, the whole value chain from assessing a site, doing the initial design, doing all the planning, manufacturing of components, assembly on site, and also operate the building with our building operating system. Yeah. But our core really is this digital end-to-end process with all the digital models that are in there, with all the optimization potential, because we're collecting data points all over the place. But at the same time, we don't believe that we are best in doing every one of those steps on our own. Yeah, if you look at Katerra, who grew from a few hundred people to 8,500 or so within 12 months by acquiring 20 plus companies, they thought they are the best window manufacturer in the world. They are the best, kitchen appliances manufacturer. They are the best construction company. They are doing, everything the best, and they need to insource everything, which is not what we believe. Yeah, we believe it's important to have this integrated end-to-end process, but then have the opportunity to actually add partners along the value chain. There is this joke in the founders round that we had at the beginning when we said, if we ever exceed 1,000 builders on the payroll, we've done something wrong. Because you don't solve problems like this by just getting as many people as you can on board. Yeah? You solve it by introducing a different process and using technology as the enabler, which actually makes you connect the sustainability, the affordability component, and the high quality, aspirational product side of it with ands instead of or, right? It's really cool to do a wooden timber lodge somewhere in the countryside, and it's probably going to be the most sustainable building ever, and you're going to cut the wood based on moon phases and whatever. Yeah, it's all going to be great. Is it going to be costly? Yes. Is it going to have a significant impact on the planet overall? No, because it's just a single solution. Having the impact on people and planet as we want it to have, the company needs to be built to scale. Yeah, and scaling really means connecting those dots with ends. And this is where tech as the enabler comes in. And there is one last component, I guess. There was the saying about Catera, too much money and too many doctors, which I believe is true to a certain extent. Yeah, because I think it's important to be short on cash because you spend the money more wisely, right? You consider what the right things are that you want to do. You're more agile, you learn quicker, you adjust quicker, and that at the end gets you to where you want to get in a quicker way and just simply more efficient and less resource wasting.
Yeah, you mentioned that it's such a great opportunity to now build on what you believe in as team, oriented along values, as you phrased it. And in our pre-talk, you expressed the idea of that we could focus in this talk on the element of everybody, because your core purpose is create sustainable living for everybody at Gropius. And I really love that angle so much. I mean, so many people get super hyped about fancy technological or technical solutions, but really focusing on what do people need and what do we aim for using that fancy technical solutions is something that people do not tend to talk that intensively about. So I would really love to get your point of view at residential buildings and what do people really need living there from their homes now, but also in future.
I would start with explaining a little bit what we mean with this everyone. And I mentioned a couple of points already, one being the affordability. So it needs to be available for a wide range or for a large audience, I would say. It also needs to follow universal design principles. So that is, I think, one of the key criteria to make sure that it's suitable for equitable use, flexibility, simplicity, and a certain degree error tolerance, and so on. Yeah. So you want to keep it as wide as you can when you define the product. So that's the starting point. And also in terms of tech savviness, a building operating system, which is basically your smart home plus pimped up solution that does all sorts of fancy things, need to be available for use for tech savvy and less tech savvy people, right? So, there is an aging population. There is a large share of people with certain needs in the population. And it would just be wrong from a demographics, from a business model perspective, but also from a values perspective to neglect those groups. Really started out doing lots of research. And I think that is one of the key drivers for creating a product or company. You really need to understand your clients. So we did all sorts of qualitative interviews. We visited people at their homes and talked about how their days look like, what preferences they have, how they use technology in the way they live, what their main issues are. Yeah, for example, what's getting them headaches? Yeah, just give you one example. If you live in a multifamily home, there might be an occasion where the elevator just simply doesn't work anymore. Yeah, so there is somewhere probably a phone number of your facility management company or so who you can call, and then you wait in line for ages, and then somebody picks up your phone and says, don't bother me. 10 people have already called, so don't waste my time, and we're going to get it repaired sooner or later. And it's likely going to be later than sooner. And then they show up, and then they try to repair the elevator. And there is a pretty high chance that they miss some parts and they need to come again and so on. So it's a process where you're basically without your vertical means of transportation in your building for a while. Look at the other alternative. The elevator has condition monitoring. Yeah, so you're basically using sensors to observe wear of components. And once certain thresholds are met, the elevator triggers a ticket in the facility management system saying, okay, the elevator needs a repair. Then the repair time is scheduled, and all the tenants in the building get an information on their panels, on their apps. There is going to be a repair scheduled for next week, Tuesday, and it's going to be between 2 and 4 p.m. So do your grocery shoppings for the week outside of this time frame. So and then they get there, and then it's all done, and then you have basically spent a couple hours without an elevators instead of weeks. So it's all around pain points like this. And there is a number more. Yeah, there's people worrying about getting a good internet connections in the building because sometimes the wires are not there. People needing household insurances, needing to shop around and ask around and do all sorts of comparisons and still don't know if they actually get a good product. And that's all things that you can package in how we define a building, which is really living as a service product solution, not just a building. So the idea is start with research on the product. So what does the product need to be doing? Then look in a broader context on the market. Yeah. So how do demographics look like? How do needs change over time? What are affordability levels, or what would people consider being affordable? And then once you put those into projects and deliver your product, you also again getting data points from product analytics. So you are basically looking at user behaviors. You're looking at what sort of sensors do they use, for what purposes, what electric sockets are more used than others are used in certain floor plans, and to adjust the products from there. So you're basically getting better and better and better over time. So I would say we are all very much individualistic. At the same time, basic needs of living don't vary too much either. Yeah, we want a safe space. We want to have some privacy in varying degrees. We want to have certain interactions with our neighbors, but also not too much. We want to have some shared facilities. We want to have a good place where we can store our bikes, where it is safe, where it is locked, where it is weather protected, and all things. So I would say there is a large share of needs that we all share, and there is very specific ones of particular groups that we then include into the product features when it comes to hardware. And then I'm coming back again to the software side of business. This is where really the customization happens, yeah.
Without a doubt, what you're building from a product perspective sounds amazing, right? And sounds like really something where I want to live, where everybody wants to live in. But like from my point of view, one could argue, and playing a little bit devil's advocate here, that what we do not need is better residential properties or better residential buildings, but just more at the moment, right? So in Germany, I think there is an estimate of 1.5 to 2 million apartments missing at the moment in urban areas, right? So a lot of the examples you described, in my opinion, they result from a market situation where you have such an unbalanced demand and supply relationship, right? Nobody's caring about the elevator because they don't have to, because I'm not going to move out because the elevator is broken, right? Because I cannot afford it's too hard to get another apartment. So what is your view on particularly this, and how do you feed with your product into this issue?
I think we need first to look at what the reasons for this gap between supply and demand is. Yeah? And one of the issues clearly is scarcity of skilled labor. This is one thing. Yeah, construction working is simply not cool. Yeah, so if somebody can do something different, they're not going to work on construction site. That's just what people don't want to do anymore. Secondly, it's the dynamics on the market when you look at property and speculation and making a developer margin or making land banking margins, which actually don't benefit the people either. Yeah, and that's really a political issue. And last but not least, the industry as such is inefficient, unproductive, and from a cost perspective, not competitive. So projects are not commercially feasible because of construction costs being too high, land prices being too high, and so on. So when you look at what we do, and we really look at at buildings as industrial products. Yeah, so all the principles from automotive, from other industries that are more product oriented and more efficiency driven, we also believe apply to construction. And this is where standardization comes in to a certain extent. Yeah, the more you're able to industrialize serial construction, modular construction, the lower the share of labor you need on site and the more you can actually do in a factory. And the more repetitive it is, because it's more standardized, the more you can automate. So we are basically taking out quite some of the, I would say, excess labor needs that construction would typically have. Same on the material side, yeah. A good share of what you deliver to a construction site, you either throw in the bin and ship it off, or it just disappears, or you need to return it to wherever, and then it disappears there. But if you have it in a factory setting, you can optimize for material use. So you can optimize, this is the size of a wall, and this is the size of panels that I need to actually put on the wall as a cladding. This is what you're getting. So you're basically moving towards a zero waste production process. At the end, it's really the product-based optimization and learning and evolution approach that makes a difference, because then it becomes scalable. Same on the planning side. If you look at basically the costs that don't go into the building, which is 15 to 25%, yeah, which is design and planning and project management and sourcing and all those things, yeah. This is 15 to 25%. And why is it like this? Because we're starting on a blank sheet of paper as an industry, where we start with our initial draft and then talk it to a whole lot of different stakeholders, and then our architects/artists come up with their dreams, and then the structural engineer says, yeah, we can all do this, but it's going to be complicated and it's going to be costly. And then the property owner at the end comes in and says, wow, you're exceeding my budget by 25%, now go and cut down. And then this is what's happening. But if you have cost certainty, if you have planning certainty, if you have no reworks, which is around 7, 8, 9, 10% also in classical construction, yeah. If you have no reworks and you take all those things out because you learn from other industries, then you are addressing the cost factor. So getting the costs to a point where you can deliver a better product out of a factory that is scalable, where you can do hundreds of thousands of square meters every year, this is helping to fill this gap. Will it require politics to a certain extent? Yes, it will also. Yeah, but I think that's a different topic.
Yeah, it's a different topic. And we agreed that we won't touch on this. We won't open that topic today, at least. You described that you had to, or you decided to start a lot of research to really understand the clients, to really then define how to build the MVP, how to build the product. I'm curious. The elevator example is quite obvious to me. Were there any surprises where you thought like, I never thought about that?
There were quite a few, and that's the good part about doing good research. If it doesn't surprise you, but just justifies your own biases, then it's no good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But one of the things, for example, that surprised me was that the number one reason for people to actually move out of a place into another one is noise. People were bothered by what they hear from their neighbors. So they wanted to be this really private space where they can feel safe, where they can, recharge their batteries. And they were basically always having this kind of, I'm not here on my own, and I don't feel protected as I wish I would because of all the surrounding. And that could be from roads, but this could also be from neighbors. For example, one of the features, we simply don't go with, this is the minimum requirements for noise properties of whatever components. We go for what we believe is right. And this is significantly above the minimum standards, just simply because we don't want to have people move in and out every few years, right? We want to have people being happy in a place that they have chosen and stay there for longer. One of the other things, to give you another example, in general, people like it cleaned up in their units, but they still have lots of stuff. Yeah, so they need to put it somewhere. And they don't want to go to the basement to get their stuff together. They're really looking for sufficient storage possibilities within their units, or at least on the same floor, ideally in their units, which might sound obvious, but if you look at the magnitude of people's responses to that, for me, it was overwhelming. Yeah, this was one of the main issues where people say, I have a problem. I don't know where to put my stuff. Yeah, and it looks messy and I don't want it to look messy, but I don't know where to put it.
This is probably also a great question, how to look at floor plans and how to really deal with that kind of design questions, keeping that in mind.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
You touched upon the mobility aspect as well. Would you describe or dive into that a bit more?
One of the things that we know from research, and this is not just our research, but I guess that's pretty widely known, is that the new urban youth does not care so much about owning, but about using mobility devices, right? So in designing a building as a product, you need to cater for that as well. And there is a couple of easy things like charging stations for e-bikes and mobility offers that you have also for, four-wheel drive solutions. Yeah. It's all those things where what is offered determines what is used. If you don't have the right setup in your building, people are going to drive. If you are living next to a metro station or a good public transportation system, you are more likely to use it, obviously, right? So it's to a certain extent choice of location, and what we can influence as the product owners is what we offer. And this is very much around sharing options, about charging options, but also making sure that, for example, there is, photovoltaic on the buildings that is actually then used to charge cars and e-bikes, and that you're not relying on the coal power plant somewhere that is actually getting your e-bike charged.
You're talking about like a lot of features right now, right? So the product itself that you're building is becoming, this is something that we totally agree on, is becoming more and more complex, right? There are a couple of things in that connection or in connection with that we would like to pick your brains on or learn a little bit more about your view, especially when it comes to standardization versus personalization. Right. So the question on how to design buildings in a way that you can easily integrate a lot and most of the features, but also versus, creating neighborhoods that look awfully the same and awfully boring, right? So my favorite example to that is Potsdamer Platz, which is, I think, the worst part of Berlin at all. Feels artificial, very unhuman, like cold. And this is a very good example, in my opinion, how not to create modern cities or areas. But what is your take on that? So how do you deal with standardization versus personalization in a way that is still feels individual to the user, the resident, in context of the neighborhood where you build your buildings?
There's lots of ways to answer to that. And the most provocative starting point would probably be to say, given that we, in the classical, traditional construction industry, start with a blank sheet of paper and we look at residential multifamily buildings, they tend to all look the same anyhow, even that there is no standardization. But I find them relatively boring. If you look at new quarters that are being built, there's very rarely a case that I find from a design perspective like extraordinary or even great. And talking about standardized products, that doesn't mean that you don't have options, right? One notion is you do more standardization on the hardware and less on the software side. So if you look, for example, at smartphones, all last iPhone models, they're all the same, but not two of us on this planet use the same because there is an app store and we have different needs and we customize it the way how we want it, right? So the software side to the hardware side, there's different degrees of customization. That is one thing. The other thing is, how many different options do people really need? I'm kind of stressing a car example here a little bit, yeah? If you look at a Tesla Model 3, you got 5 colors, you got 2 packages, you got the upgrade package for autonomous driving, and then you can choose whether you want winter tires as well or not. That's about it, and there's like 2 or 3 models. This is a limited number of choices. If you ever tried to configure any of the German premium car manufacturer, cars, yeah, you will find 727 options, that lead to exclude themselves again after you have selected one, when you select another one, and at the end you end up with something that's fully customizable, but which doesn't add any value, because the point really is what degree of customization is adding additional value, and what isn't. And yes, you need certain, different facade types or facade colors. You need, certain designs on how balconies look like and what color they have. Yeah. But would your dimension, for example, of a balcony for a 3-bedroom unit be so much different? No, you always want to put a table out there that seats 6 people, and you want to do, a little bit of plants there, and you want to have your electric barbecue, and, this is the things that you want. It's not so much different. So at the end, a building system needs to be flexible enough to adjust to local requirements, tastes, the neighborhood and all that, but still need to be standardized enough so that you can leverage the benefits of automation and serial manufacturing and industrial manufacturing of components in various degrees, right? Maybe just one more sentence. A robot doesn't care so much about whether the parts that it moves are all of the same size or different sizes, right? So you can, by using smart software, be rather individualistic. Again, linked to the criteria question that you asked, we start relatively narrow with fewer options, with the opportunity to extend that later on. But it would just simply be wrong to have everything on your catalog from day one. Complexity comes at a cost, and we tend to forget that.
I think now it's the perfect timing to look at the MVP, because you mentioned how you started doing things, how you decided to doing things, and you mentioned, or your MVP basically is a 9-story building, and this doesn't seem the leanest, easiest way to do so. So we would like to understand, what was the rationale behind it? How hard was it, or how easy was it to take that decision as management team?
Construction has relatively long cycle times. So by the time that you acquire a plot and then you do all the design and permitting and start building and then people move in, that's in traditional construction, anything between 18 and 36 months, whatever it is. Yeah, it's much faster in our case, but still it's a relatively long time. So in shorter cycle industries, if you look at software, for example, or any of the products that have a short lifespan, you get feedback from clients really quickly. And it even starts, or it might in some cases even be enough to ask a couple of friends whether they like an idea, and that is then your product research. Yeah. And then you do some, and then you again get feedback, and then you change something, and then you again get feedback. In a building that has 100 or 80 years lifespan, that's not that easy. So what we did obviously lots of research, as I mentioned, and then we took a large share of the wish list of our potential tenants and put it into the first product delivery, simply because we wanted to test a wide range of features and get feedback on them. Yeah, knowing that we cannot just put together another 9-story building every other week or so just to try out new features. So it needed to be very, very complete as the first starting point. I mean, we do have some mock-ups where we play around with stuff, but from a real-life building, that's really it. Now, same with the number of stories, right? So it's 9-story building, as you mentioned. If you look at German building codes, would it have been 5 stories? It would have been much easier. Yeah, fire regulations are easier to handle. Getting building permits is much easier to handle. Everything is just much easier to handle. So we really took on a big bite from, as the starting point. But we also taking up a whole industry, right? So we are not afraid of, larger challenges, ambitious stuff that we want to do. So it's just something that we feel right to do. It's a little bit in our DNA. So it's ambitious, but it's possible. It's within the limits of physics, so it can be done. So let's try it out. Was it hard to convince Yeah, within the organization, to a certain extent, yes, especially those people who are from the construction industry as a background, because they will say, there's so many issues that we need to solve and so complicated and all that. But at the end of the day, development or developing a product, this is what we are good at. So it's something that we spend most of our time on, really. And then shipping it is just the last step. It also was not hard to convince our shareholders, because that's also one of the concerns that one might have, right? We are lucky to have people on board who work with us as partners, and that makes a big difference, right? So it's not, let's get Ingropius and then let's get out a couple of years later with a huge multiple, and that's not the intention. So it's a more longer term oriented crowd that understands that construction industry as such is hard to change, that it's costly to do so, that development of systems, of products is obviously something pretty resource intense, and it's just going to take a while. But that's how it is. Somebody needs to do it, and we've started to be part of that. On the building operating system, we can start with something more extensive also on the hardware side. So we'd rather put in a few more sensors than what we would need for functionality on day one, but start with a smaller software suite that can be expanded as we learn and as we move along. And this can always be upgraded in existing buildings. So kind of like again, coming back to your iPhones or Teslas or whatever it is, there is upgrades, and upgrades add new functionality by keeping the hardware untouched. And the same thing is happening here as well.
And do you think you as founding team would be able to do it if you would be first-time founders?
I guess it would make it at least much more complicated. And I'm excluding myself here because I'm really coming from a corporate background. But as a founders team, we know how to build companies. And building a company is not the same as actually running a company or being part of a company. There is a certain network, funding opportunities, trust that you have built in the community, also in the financing community, but also in your relevant industry community. That is very helpful there. And secondly, I think, if you look at taking the bull by the horns, like addressing the whole construction industry in one go, that's a huge thing. At the same time, there is much more competition in the startup space, in niches, in kind of like island solutions for a specific problems, where you're competing against hundreds of other startups that look at it from different angles, but basically try to solve the same problem. But if you take something that big as an industry, there is limited competition, and that kind of makes us a little bit, outstanding standing out actually from the other players around. But that you can only do if you've got the background and the track record and the experience in doing stuff like this, and have the courage to think big and act upon it. Yeah. So I'd say it would be much harder for first-time founders, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so too. I mean, it's super interesting. I have so many more questions when it comes to what impact does all the long timing has, what impact does everything has on the culture in your company. We don't have time to do that because we have to come to an end now. And we love to end our episodes with a quick fire round. So now it's about 10 questions, 10 or 60 seconds. 10 seconds would be a bit hard. So are you in?
Yes, absolutely. But can I ask one more thing? Because you just gave me a keyword that I want to say one sentence on and then get into that.
Okay, one last
One last thing. If you build a company that's people-centric, you cannot do this just by looking at the people outside of the company. So the same thing you need to do internally as well. I mentioned a couple of times these values that we are building this company along with. And that is so relevant in recruiting as well. So we want to have people on board who share the same values. This is something that you cannot train, right? You can train skills, but you don't train values. And if you don't put your own builders in your own environment within your own companies, also on this top first position, you'll fail doing that with the outside world. Yeah, so this always goes hand in hand.
Yeah, love that. That would actually be famous last words, and now we should end the episode. It's kind of hard to get back to the fire round, but still, we're getting there. No, you don't have to stop.
Okay, I'll kick it off. Bernd, so urban or rural area?
I enjoy living urban. I like to be in the nature, especially on weekends. Yeah, I think that's very important for me to stay connected to nature and the world outside of cities.
High-rise or low-rise building?
I would have chosen mid-rise because this is what our research finds out that this is the most comfortable. Around 5 stories, this is what the sweet spot is. Yeah, people don't want to get higher.
Yeah, I agree. I live 5th floor, so it's amazing. but anyway, work from home or from the office?
Office. I like the people. It's important for me to have them around.
Now I have a follow-up question when it comes to not being at home. Are people there that you don't want to see? But I won't ask that. So my question is, functional or aesthetic?
I like functional, and I consider it very beautiful. So it's actually and answer. Following Gropius principles, which is linked to Bauhaus, it would be functional, and you would also consider Bauhaus, I guess, aesthetic. Mm-hmm. So I really think it's an and answer.
Startup or corporate?
Well...
Come on, Bernd, decide.
I would say startup.
Local or global?
We need to think global because there is many more connections that we see on first sight. So thinking global is extremely important, and taking care of the global consequences of our doing might then lead us to act local, which is, I think, also a very valid thing and a growing trend.
Bike or public transport?
Bike, yeah. Or scooter sometimes.
Scooter, okay. Build new or modernize?
Well, the ideal case would be building something new from recycled, reused materials. So it's the combination. You need to have fewer trade-offs in renovation for the people living in those buildings. So it would be building new, but with recycled, reused materials. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Both has its space, though. So I'm not saying we don't need both. We do need both.
Agree. Environmental or social impact?
Well, I'll start with the people and then the rest will come.
Disruptive or keeping with tradition?
Disruptive, but understand tradition.
I think, Ben, you have been the first person who tried to avoid today, like say black or white.
Because, I think at the end of the day, if you want to disrupt, and at the same time you're saying everything that's been around for centuries is bad, you're missing out on an opportunity to learn. So disruption only works if you include everything that's already been learned. I'm not a black and white person. I think it is, in many instances, there is different people, there is different possibilities, there is different, all roads lead to Rome, as we say. Yeah. So very often it's not single solution that solves all problems. Yeah.
Nice.
Thank you very much.
It was fun having you.
It was so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was great. It was great chatting with you. You're doing an excellent thing here. So great stuff. I appreciate it a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Urban Tech VC, a podcast for urban leaders shaping the cities of tomorrow. If you love our show, do drop us a review, share it with your friends, and follow 2BX on LinkedIn or Instagram. And if you are about to raise a round, drop us a note at LinkedIn or via email at idea@2bx.vc. Let's have a talk and see where we can help. Are you tired of always hearing about Silicon Valley VCs and not knowing what the greats of European VC are thinking? Well, no more. Head on over to EU.vc, the go-to place for everything European VC. You'll find podcasts, events, and expert-curated content from all over the EU VC scene. Well, what are you waiting for? Go to EU.vc.